Okay, so I'm going to be talking about manage your own Pi cloud with hosted Pi. So my name is Ben Nuttall. I'm a software engineer at BBC News Labs. I used to work at the Raspberry Pi Foundation. I was sort of community manager and various other things there. But I've been at the BBC a little over a year now. And I'm the creator of GPIO Zero and piwheels. So they're two projects that I worked on in my time at Raspberry Pi, and I still maintain them. There you can find me on Twitter and GitHub. So just a quick shout out about this before I get into the talk. The GPIO Zero is a Python library that I created with a guy called Dave Jones. It's a simple interface to GPIO devices. So rather than being another kind of pin library where it's a different way of turning pins on and off, it's about the abstraction of devices. So you create an instance of an LED and you control it with its methods and that kind of thing. And it provides interfaces to a variety of different components. And since the last Raspberry Pi, we did some work on a new release, version 1.6, and that included the rotary encoder, which we learned about how to use from last month's talk. So thanks to Tony for that. So there's a really nice API to a rotary encoder now if you want to take a look at that. Mythic Beasts is a hosting company based in the UK. This is a guy called Pete, who is one of the directors of the company. They're the hosts of the Raspberry Pi website and a lot of the stuff on the Raspberry Pi website. So the Raspbian downloads, the Raspberry Pi OS downloads, the apt archive, they run all of that, provide all of that infrastructure for the Raspberry Pi community. They're a really good hosting provider. So I used to run the Raspberry Pi website, and they were great to work with. And they have data centers in the UK, in Europe, and in the US, and they have a range of support options. So everything from, I'll do everything myself, just give me the access to the server, to fully fledged kind of holding your hand and keeping your website running. So all sorts of options available. So they one of the services they've been provided for the last 3 years or so is Raspberry Pi hosting. So actually, instead of just a VM on a server, an instance, you get a Raspberry Pi. So you say, I would like a Raspberry Pi, please, and they give you an SSH access to it, and it's a real Raspberry Pi in a data center in London. They started with Pi 3s, it was a few years ago, and they've since added Pi 4s. And the way that they work is there's a whole rack of Raspberry Pis that are all Ethernetted up. There's no SD cards, so there's nothing to worry about kind of SD cards dying. It's all net booted, so it's managed by a server, and all of the images boot. The Pis boot from images on a server, and your disk space is on the server as well. It's on an IPv6 only network, because we now live in an age where an IP address costs you more than a computer. So it does make sense for them to not have to provide an IPv4 address for every single Pi. But that doesn't cut you off from accessing it over IPv4, either as a web user or an SSH into it. They provide a bridge for both SSH access and the web proxy. You can either, if you want to use one of these as a service, they'll either bill you monthly, or you can choose on demand. So if you're just booting them up, doing some job and then shutting them down, you can choose to be just billed for the bit that you used. Otherwise, it's just a flat rate monthly. It's just a few quid a month. To get a whole Pi to yourself. And you can reinstall them at any time as well. So this is what it looks like if you're provisioning a new Pi through the web interface they provide. So you choose whether it's a 3 or a 4, and there's just a slider for how much disk space you want. And then you get something like this, and you can, you get the SSH credentials that you need. You can add a SSH key to it so you can access it yourself. You can manage it in that way, power it off, power it on, reboot, reinstall. And it's a really great service. I've been using it for a few years. We run the piwheels project on it. So this is piwheels is the automated compilation of all the Python packages on the Python package index for the Raspberry Pi hardware. And they're natively compiled on real Pis in this data center. And this makes pip install really fast when you're on a Pi. So previously you'd have to compile all the code yourself, and it would take ages. And now it's really fast because we provide pre-compiled versions of everything. And it just works out the box with the Raspberry Pi OS that you get from the Raspberry Pi website. is pre-configured to use it. So when you use pip, you're using piwheels. This was actually first announced at Raspberry Pi in 2017. I came to the group and said, like, I've got this project I've been working on. You're the first people to see it. This is what it is. And it went from there and became a public real thing that's still going today and has saved hundreds and hundreds of years of build time for people. So you can check out the website piwheels.org and the source on GitHub. So we've been using that for a few years and been doing it the old way with using the web interface to Mythic Beasts. So literally clicking in and ordering a new service. They don't actually bill us they don't charge us for using the hosted Pi because we were kind of testing it. It's something they wanted to support. I think it's a good project. But we were just managing everything through the web interface. And then Mythic provided a REST API that you could use. Actually, before I go into that, just the last thing I've got here is that the way piwheels is set up is that it's there's a single Pi that's the web server, so the whole controlling all of the builders and all the controlling of everything that happens on piwheels is on one Pi, which used to be a Pi 3, it's now a Pi 4. It's got a 2 terabyte disk allocation on a server, so definitely not an SD card. And every single pip request, whether it's just searching for something or seeing what packages are available or downloading the file, is coming from one physical Pi. Obviously, the files are on the file server, but the request is managed by the web server on the Pi. And then we've got a few builders running, Stretch, and a few running Buster, and they work through the queue and they get distributed jobs by the main one. And there's also a VM, which we used to run the database on a Pi, or actually on the web server Pi, but it started getting too much for it. It needed more RAM than the Pi had at the time. So that's running on VM now, but yeah. And just to show this isn't just a hobby project that gets a few hits a day. It's had nearly 40 million downloads in total over the last few years, and in a single day at the moment, the averages at the moment are about 130,000 downloads a day, 850,000 pip requests for packages, and that adds up to about 140 gig of bandwidth in a single day, all being served from this one Pi. It's going up all the time. So then Mythic Beasts provided this API, and so you can send a request, using something like curl. You authenticate, get a token, and store stuff that you need in variables in Bash, whatever. But something like this, you end up with where you can send a request to this API, and you could turn on a Pi or reboot a Pi or whatever the things that they provide are. And it was quite cool, and I kind of played around with it a bit. And I just had a few scripts that were just handy. Like if I needed to reboot them all, I had a script ready that would do that kind of thing. But it wasn't very dynamic, and I couldn't do very much with it. It was just like I had hard coded some scripts that would do it. And then after a little while, I thought, well, could we do this in Python and actually make it a little bit, expose it a little bit nicer? So then you start having things like this where you store the values that you get back from the requests, and you can actually wrap things up in functions or whatever, and just have an interface that you provide that goes, well, I'll go and I'd like have a create Pi method, or that kind of thing, and started kind of playing around with it. And before you know it, I'd kind of implemented everything you needed, and so this thing became a library. So hostedpi is now a library. So it's a Python library that provides a command line interface, but everything command line interface provides is implemented in Python using the library. So you can pip install hostedpi, and you've got access to the library and the command line interface. And that's a picture of the documentation for the project. So to get started with hostedpi, all you have to do is, this is all documented, but just the rough outline is you create a Mythic Beasts account, you create an API key, you install hostedpi, you configure your API keys as environment variables, and then you have to pass them between programs and whatnot. And then you can run a simple command that will test your API connection. So these are all the command line commands provided. So these are all the kinds of things you can do. I'm just going to go over them in groups and show you the kind of what you can do. So if you want to do stuff to do with the account, so hostedpi test will just return connected to Mythic Beasts API if your authentication it was successful, and it would give you an error if not. So that's quite useful just to make sure that you've got access. Then you can run commands like this: hostedpi create mypi. So give it a name. I've called it mypi, and it comes back saying, "Yeah, okay, I've provisioned that pi. There's now a pi in your account with this name. Here is all the information about it." So immediately within seconds, I've had this request for a new instance of a Raspberry Pi account in my account. So I've got its name there. Its status is currently provisioning, so it takes a few minutes just to prepare and boot up. It tells me this is a Raspberry Pi 3. It's got 10 gig disk. These are its IP addresses and the SSH port and all that kind of thing is all there. Now you might want to specify a specific image, and there's a different set of images for Pi 3s and Pi 4s. So these are there's a command that will tell you the strings that you need for the different images. So you've got hosted Pi images 3 will give you those. So there's Ubuntu, Raspbian, different versions of Raspbian, and then for Pi 4 there's Ubuntu 64-bit, there's Raspbian Buster, Raspberry Pi OS 64-bit, and Ubuntu 18 as well. And so instead of just running create and letting it choose the default settings for everything, you can specify which model you want, 3 or 4. You can specify the disk space that you want, the same way you could through the web interface. Just choose an image, and it obviously has to be an image that is that matches the platform the Pi model you're on. And you can provide an SSH key to automatically add to the Pi so that you can SSH onto it straight away. So then, again, it comes back with all the information about the Pi that's been provisioned. So this one you can see is a Raspberry Pi 4 with a 60 gig disk, and it's been loaded with the Ubuntu image. So if you want to list Pis, you can just run hosted Pi list, and there's actually aliases for a lot of the commands. So there's things like hosted Pi ls is kind of a neat way of just a shorthand for that. We'll list the Pis available in the account. So then you've got things like for a specific Pi, you've got all these are all the controls, management controls for the Pi itself. So hosted Pi cancel, you can turn it on off, you can cancel the service, check the power status, check the provisioning status, and show it, which is what that kind of block of information I showed. And you can reboot, obviously. So hosted Pi on, and then the name of the Pi, hosted Pi off, name of the Pi, reboot, power will tell you whether it's powered on or not, status, live just means it's finished provisioning and finished installing, and you can cancel the service that way as well. So there's no monthly billing when you're using the API, it's all on demand. So if you create one, SSH into it, log off and then cancel it, you'll be charged for the few minutes or whatever that it was up. And then you can also provide, the command line interface provides you a way of running commands that happen to multiple Pis. So if you've got three Pis in your account, you could do hosted Pi reboot and then list them space separated as different arguments, and that will reboot one at a time and give you that feedback about each one. And then, of course, because you could do that, you can also make use of brace expansions and bash expansion sort of thing. So hosted Pi off, my Pi brace 4, 5, 6 is the same as writing them out in full the way I did previously, but with number 4, 5, and 6 does the exact same thing. So if you've got Pis in your account that are named in that way, so with piwheels we have them like numerically sequenced like that, it makes it really easy to do that without having to type out the whole name. So hosted Pi show, like I said, this kind of comes back when you create a new Pi anyway. But if you want to show it at any time, you can do this. It tells you the model and all the information about it, the URLs that if you've got a web server attached, it will installed. It will you can load those web URLs and the SSH commands for IPv4 and v6. And then there's different tools for managing your SSH keys. So rather than having passwords to, having a log on, having to type Pi and Raspberry when you want to log on to an SSH isn't the best idea. SSH key management allows you to restrict only your machine with that particular SSH key can access it, locked out to anybody else. So to be able to manage that through the API, you just say, well, add my key from this machine, or copy the keys from that Pi in my account onto this other one. You can do things like count the number of keys, output the keys to actually see them, remove keys from a Pi, and there's a command that you can install on Raspberry Pi. It's completely separate from this, called SSH import ID, which is a really neat way of saying, if you're on a server, you could say SSH import ID this GitHub user, and any keys that are associated with that GitHub user that they can push to get their own GitHub from, their public keys are exposed, and it will allow that user access to that server. So you, in the same vein, hostedpi SSH import ID, GitHub Ben Nuttall will download my public keys from my GitHub and enable all the computers that I can push to GitHub from access to this server. So some examples here, we've got add key, and you provide it a path to a public key, and it will add the public key to the Pi. Count keys, comes back with a number. Copy keys, and again, there's an alias for this, which is just CP. So I like to say hosted Pi, CP, piwheels to this other Pi. And it just means take all the keys that are currently on piwheels, that's I've got access and Dave's got access, copy them, all the same ones, to this new Pi. SSH import ID, GitHub Ben Nuttall. So it retrieved 4 keys from GitHub and added them to this Pi. And then list the keys, and then remove keys, can remove them as well. So you can, what it will also do is do a kind of set comparison first. So if it says retrieve 4 keys from GitHub, and then it tries to add them, if any of them are already there, then they're not duplicated, they're not concatenated. So you end up kind of reducing it down to just the new, saying, oh, well, I added 2 because 2 of them are already there. So there's little things like that that the Python end of it provides. So if you want to SSH onto a Pi, first of all, you need to know the command you type, because if you're presumably you're on IPv4, you don't have IPv6, you need to access it via a particular port number, which will route you round through Mythic's thing to the right Pi on the network. So they provide you that, and they say, right, well, if you go to ssh.yourpisname.hostedpi.com, but on this particular port, we'll route you round. And so you get that you type this command, and it prints the result of what that command is. And then what you could do is copy paste it and hit enter, and you would SSH, be SSH'd onto your Pi. Alternatively, you could do a little trick like this, where you use backticks to say, execute whatever the result of this command is, which is kind of a shorthand in this case for that. So whatever the result of this command is, execute it. So it's, because it is a command, it executes it instantly, and that's another way of getting on. So that's the command line interface kind of covered. But then if you want to do something more bespoke than just the standard sort of things, there's a good coverage of all the stuff you would likely need to be able to do. But if you want to do something really custom, you can write your own Python script in the library, which the command line interface is written in, is available as well. And there's documentation for all the things that it provides. So there's a PyCloud class. So you construct a PyCloud class, and it takes your authentication from your environment variables, and you can, and then you've got access to your account, and you can say create a newer Pi in this account. So that rather than a command that's create Pi and takes all those flags, it's a method on the cloud object. So you say model is this, and disk is this, and SSH keys are this. And then within your account, you have access to all the Pis that you have. So there's a Pi class, and each Pi has things like on, off, reboot methods, accessing SSH keys, and all that kind of thing. So for instance, if you wanted to, this is an example where we're using GPIO Zero, LED and button to, when you press a button, create me a Pi, and then flash the LED on, turn the LED on. And I've got a video I tweeted once of me running this when I was getting started, and it's just like you press a button, it asks Mythic to give you a Pi, and then it opened the browser and showed that Pi had been created. And I think I've got another example. So if, for instance, you had a Pi that was that had some web page on it, so maybe it was, got some data and put some data on a web page or output to a JSON file, something like that. You could use the API to get. I mean, it's a bit of a stretch here, but you could use the API just to get the URL for a particular Pi. Otherwise, you might just know it and have it hard coded, but and then use requests to fetch the contents of that page, and then and then retrieve them and do something with them. So using the API just to get access to like what would this Pi's URL be, which isn't a great feat, but yeah, there you are. So in terms of the sort of project status, the whole time I've been working on this, sort of I've been in contact with Mythic Beasts and just emailing them and saying, I've got this problem, like this endpoint is coming back with this error message or whatever, and we've had this kind of continual feedback loop. So they've taken on board some of the suggestions I've made, and they've asked for my opinion on what they should add and that kind of thing. So that's been really good. It's getting sort of more, it's kind of feature complete now pretty much. So that's good. But the library itself, I'd consider a beta until I get to the point where I've released a 1.0 release. It's subject to change. So I might decide to rename something or, change something or deprecate something. So yeah, hang tight for that. And I'm also kind of working on a test suite so I can be more assured that everything works the way it should. That's something I'm working on. And the next thing I'd like to do once it's more stable is integrate this into piwheels so that piwheels I don't have to create the Pis myself and then tell piwheels about them. I want piwheels to be able to say, there's quite a big queue coming up. I need a couple of extra Pis, and provision them itself, image them, and then decommission them when, like an auto scaling kind of thing, which would be really cool. Yeah, hopefully we'll be able to, integrate that into piwheels as well. So yeah, if you want to try it out, it's just sign up for a Mythic Beasts account, get an API key, and read the docs to get started. Even if you just play around with it, it's it's kind of fun to play with, and it's good to have in your mind to, as a way to use this. If you've got anything that needs to be, like piwheels, the code needs to be run on a Pi, otherwise it's not just that I'm using for it as a cheap server, although you could certainly see it that way. I need to execute that Pi that code on a Pi because it's about native code compilation on the ARM hardware. So depending on your purposes, you might desperately need a Pi, or it might just be a fun thing to have a play with. So yeah, give it a try. If you've got any feedback, let me know. Post GitHub issues or ask questions on there. Just pip install hostedpi. And that's all from me.
That's really cool.
Actually, I've probably got, if there's time to I can like open a terminal and just show you some basic commands. If anyone's got any questions, just shout out. There is no clone Pi method because the images aren't, it would be nice if you could, this is one thing I think is missing, is that I want to be able to create a new Pi from, say, the Raspberry Pi OS, install a load of stuff, prepare it, and like freeze it at that point, and then boot from that image. Unfortunately, you can't do that at the moment. Yeah, it would be nice if we could, but not currently. So I just have like a deploy script that I run when I need to. Are there any throttling or quota limitations to avoid buggy loop eating? Yes, sort of. There's when you try to reboot a Pi, it will it has a kind of like, it will try 5 times or something and feedback what's going on, and you can poll the API for what is its current boot status. So that's quite useful. But if it can't boot and fails to boot because you've broken it somehow, you can't damage the Pi, you can't break the Pi because it's it's not on an SD card. They can always launch from a saved image, but yeah, you can yeah, it would be nice if you could do that. Can you run VNC? I don't know enough about what that would entail, but quite possibly. I mean, if you think about it as just it's essentially a VM, except it's not virtual; it's a real machine. If you could do it on a Pi in your house, and you can do it on a server in a, on a VM in a data center, then I don't see why not. But there might be some intricate detail that means you can't. I don't know for sure. Right, let me see if I can share my terminal. Okay, so I've got the terminal here, hostedpi ls, for instance. So each of those is a Pi in the system, and apart from the last one, which is just a test one, they're all doing stuff on the piwheels system. So if I wanted to hostedpi, it's just a command line program. So these are all the commands that it's got. So I want to show one. So hostedpi show, for instance. Kind of it's weird. I'm looking at the screen, the Zoom screen, rather than the actual one, but it's fast enough. So yeah, that's the details about the Pi that's called piwheels. That's actually the original piwheels one. The one that's hosting the main website is this one. It's now a Pi 4. Yeah, so that's the Pi 4 with 2 terabytes of disk space. If I wanted to reboot Raspberry, that's the one that isn't doing anything. Send that command, it's rebooted it. And if I look at hostedpi Raspberry, that's saying live, that's not issues. Like it's powered on, but yeah, that kind of thing, you can just quickly get responses back from stuff. If I wanted to look at its keys, for instance, these are public keys. So a bunch of different keys that have been imported from GitHub. And if I was to do hostedpi sh import ID that 4 keys were retrieved from GitHub. They'll probably already have them. Okay, so I did a new PC build since I last imported my keys, so it's found 4, but it's only added 1 new one. So that's a good example actually. But yeah. Yeah.
So if you start running this, yeah. So talking about your example of spinning up more pies when you need them, that gets a bit Inception, doesn't it? So you have automated spinning up of new instances of pies. That's pretty cool.
I knew I'd expose a bug or something there. Yeah, that's because I've already fixed that. But yeah, anyway, sorry, what was that?
Yeah, just saying so you're talking about automating it so that you have a program running it within the Mythic Beasts pies and spinning up more pies as you need them. That's pretty cool. That's pretty Inception though, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I've just logged on to piwheels master. So this is a kind of what's the word? This is like a graphic, kind of cursor style interface to managing all the pies. This is nothing to do with hostedpi the library. This is already in piwheels, the way piwheels works. So this is viewing what the master Pi, the main web server is doing, and what all the other builders that are attached to it are doing. So they're all idle at the moment. There's nothing in the queue. But as I scroll through them, you can see them. But if I switch to another window in here, I have another one. So I'm currently SSH'd onto a Pi in the Mythic Beasts data center, but I have hostedpi installed on it. So if I do hostedpi ls here, this is the same thing. It's my same account. It's just running on another Pi. But if, for instance, I was to hostedpi reboot, let's say which one's up, so 10. So from the Pi, I've told one of the other ones to reboot, and then I don't know how long it takes to time out, but this one will disappear in a moment and then come back. We might not have time to see it happen, but yeah, you get the idea. But what I'm proposing is that in the code of the project, the way the code is running to run all of this and all the queue management and everything, that would import the library and be able to manage them from itself automatically. You can see a load of new packages just arrived there and it started building stuff. That's quite interesting to look at, but nothing really to do with hostedpi.
That's very cool in itself, isn't it? Just having the piwheel status showing. It's pretty cool.
Can I ask if any one of the Pis crash or whatever, does it automatically pick that up and move to the next Pi?
Yeah, basically. Yeah. So if a job gets sent out and piwheels 12 starts building the latest version of NumPy but runs out of RAM or something, if it errors cleanly and says no, I failed to build it, then it will report back to the database and say that's funny, actually that's piwheels 10, rather than disappear and come back, has actually just duplicated itself. But it will time out eventually. Yeah, the other one will time out eventually. So yeah, if it reports back that it failed and it's able to carry on, then that just gets logged in the database as a failed build. If it actually crashes midway, it will remain in the queue, and then the next time a Pi says I'm idle, what jobs are there to do, it could get given that same job. Yeah.
Okay.
How good are the heat sinks?
Heat sinks, did you say?
Yes.
So they, I don't know what heat sinks they use, but they all have fans attached because they've got PoE hats with the fan built in. Yeah. And then I think they've got extra fans around the whole kind of rack that cool the whole thing. And they actually, pre-install a script that kind of writes back home its temperature every minute or something. So they're able to monitor it. And because I'm constantly compiling stuff on there, I'm pushing the CPU to its, the highest it's likely to get with, doing stuff. So that
well tested.
It's generally fine. Yeah. So if I look at I can't actually see the thing is about there's like a little graph of temperature on the right hand side of the top there, but it's kind of hard to see where it's somewhere between 40 and 80. I can't really see what it is, but yeah.
40 and 80.
They're all generally, especially the actually the Pi 4s are much lower, probably because they're not as busy. Yeah, you can see like a graph of the downloads from the master, which is in, where's it gone? Downloads per hour. You can see it's got a little bit of a wave on it. 7,600 odd an hour.
Very cool. Any other questions, anyone? Any questions?
Ansible, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. They run out of available Pis. Yes, the reason I didn't do this talk last month is because I suppose it didn't really make a difference, but I didn't want to, they didn't have any Pi 4s in stock. They've been waiting to get into the data center, and the data center kept having COVID cases, so they refused to send any of their staff to go and install Pis. So they've been out of stock for Pi 4s for a while, but they got in since last month, and they've installed more. But yeah, it does, and there's literally a HTTP error in the HTTP status code when you ask for a Pi and they're out of stock, and it's like if you get a 403 or whatever it is, I can't remember, 503 or something, that means it's out of stock, and it comes back with a message saying out of stock, and the library knows what that error code means and will tell you that in a nice way, and in Python. So do you have? I don't have a photo of the pies in the data center. Pete might do. What does he use it for? This is piwheels, which is each pie that you can see. I'm currently on a pie, but each pie you can see in this list is another pie in the Mythic Cloud. And they're all compiling Python packages. So you get natively compiled Python packages. So if a Python package has been implemented in C or Fortran or something, it needs compiling for the architecture, for the Pi architecture. We use these to build them and then host them on the Pi that I'm currently on. And then when you pip install NumPy, you get the version that was compiled by these instead of the source distribution and have to compile it yourself. That's
Is he public? Like, I mean,
yeah.
so
piwheels.org.
Is it like you have like other people host the same thing, and then you contribute to compile the stuff, and then people can just download pre-compiled stuff?
It's all done by this system, so it's all automated. No, people don't build them and send them in. It's just everything that gets published to the main Python package index, we pick up and build it. And then, like you said, everybody who uses pip, it goes.
It's not for your personal usage. You would just contribute to help to compile and push it back.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Okay, that sounds cool.
Yeah, you can read about it at piwheels.org. I better come off then, Rich. Right.
That was very, very interesting. It's just amazing. It's amazing. I think it's very cool. It's very unusual use case. I haven't seen a use case like that before.